Hi all, my name is Elizabeth Langer. Thank you for joining us here today to speak about entering the legal field from a non-legal background. We're joined today by two Cambridge alumni who have done just that. So I will turn it over to Isabella and Blaise to introduce themselves.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Izzy, and I'm currently a trainee solicitor at Clifford Chance. I'm in my third seat, so in my second year of my training contract. And I studied natural sciences at CATS. I graduated in 2020, and yeah, really, really enjoyed my science degree. But I'm now working as a lawyer. I think Blaise is having just a little issue with connecting to the audio, so I can introduce him if that would work, Lizzie.
I guess in the meantime, the next thing I was going to bring up was how you decided to pursue law for Blaise as well. But if you wanted to speak to your own background and kind of the journey that you took from obviously being a nat ski is a bit different than being a lawyer, but how that worked out for you.
Yeah, so I actually started thinking about law before I did my degree. I'd always thought that maybe I might end up in law. I was also open to the idea of becoming a scientist. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And in my first year, what I did was I sort of looked at a whole range of different jobs to see whether there were any kind of vacation schemes or opportunities to get work experience. And I ended up doing something called a first year springboard scheme with Clifford Chance, which I did in the summer of after my first year. And I really enjoyed the experience and was really lucky in that after that I was actually offered the training contract with Clifford Chance. And after that, I kind of mulled it over, did some other work experience, worked in a lab for a bit, did some science communication work experience, and then in the end decided that, I thought converting to law might be a good idea. So then accepted my offer with Clifford Chance, and then went on to the whole process of converting to a law degree, and onto my training contract.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Blaise, Izzy just introduced herself, a bit about her background, and also why she decided to pursue law. And I'd love to hear the same from you.
Great. Sure. So I'm Blaise. I'm an associate in the litigation and dispute resolution team here at Clifford Chance. In terms of background, I studied history at Cambridge. I matriculated in 2015. So I did my degree until 2018. I got my job offer at Clifford Chance in 2016. And I did what was then the law conversion. Then I went back to Cambridge to go and do a master in economic history, which CC allowed me to do. And then I did the LPC starting in 2021 and the qualified into litigation. In terms of why law, that's a good question. I think it was something that I was always interested in. The kind of mixture of advocacy, critical thinking, and also just how it kind of approached the commercial world at large. Although I would say I don't think when I came to university I was entirely fixed about what kind of firm I wanted to go to or what kind of area of law I wanted to practice. And so I've always thought that the kind of time you have at university is a very good time to start trying to figure out exactly what you want to do, be it law, be it any other area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people are potentially still figuring out what they want to do. What sorts of things would you recommend people think about? What sorts of resources were useful for either of you in terms of kind of helping to make that decision and to consider lots of different employment options?
I would say for me, the thing that I found really useful was actually the career service. So when I was in first year, I did actually go to the career service and picked up one of their brochures, and had a really short meeting with one of the careers advisors who told me about the existence of things like vacation schemes, because I had no idea about any of the processes that you needed to go through to get into things like law, banking, that kind of thing. So that was really useful just to even know the procedures and what opportunities were available. But then I think it's also really helpful to speak to your academic supervisors as well. I think that definitely helped me in ruling out going into science as a career, and made me think that perhaps I was still interested in sort of an intellectual career, like law, where I could maybe even use some of that science knowledge, which you definitely can if you go and find the right work as a lawyer. But I maybe wasn't so interested in being in a lab every day and as interested in the intricacies of designing experiments and that kind of thing. So I found my supervisors and my director of studies really useful for channeling that through as well.
Yeah, that's all really great advice. I think I would differentiate between finding out whether you want to do law from kind of finding out how to find it if you want to do law. So, you know, in one sense, finding out how you want to go and do law is a question of trying to get experience, speaking to people who are in the field, speaking to your academic supervisor, and the like. Whereas finding out how to, you know, get into law is kind of a question of the kind of mechanical aspects of it. You know, it's doing the first year scheme, doing the vacation schemes, applying the training contracts, doing experience that way. In terms of good people to speak to, you know, the career service are really great. I spend a lot of time with them, both personally and when I was doing the student societies, you know, trying to help them, because they're very keen to help students, but sometimes you kind of go to the last minute. Some of my friends did. Other things I think are worth chatting to are people in the year above, you know. I found that a lot of the best advice tends to come from people who had, you know, gone through the training contract process, you know, second, third years, and I was in first year, and so on. Those are really good people to go and talk to in just the kind of questions you're slightly scared to ask somebody who might be slightly more formally trying to guide you.
Absolutely. So after you decided that perhaps law was right for you, you've talked a bit about this in your introductions, but what steps did both of you take to get from having studied a non-law degree to now being able to pursue law as a career?
Go first, Lizzie, if that's all right.
Yeah.
For context, Lizzie and I sat next door to each other at work, but I would kind of say, like, I don't actually think that there's too much of a difference from if you do a non-law degree versus doing a law degree when it comes to applications. You know, it's still the same process. It's still the same doing open days, doing vacation schemes, you know, working at the bar, doing mini pupilages. It's not massively different in the kind of general scheme of things. I think the only difference is maybe you'll be a bit more of an outlier in your department. You know, from my recognition, you know, all the law students are kind of applying, and sometimes you'll be maybe one of 3 or 4 or 5 in your department. So I guess in terms of the mechanics, it's not very different. I suppose in terms of the practice, can be quite helpful to come from a non-law background, I think, because I think sometimes when they go and I've spoken to partners or interviewers and the like, and I think one thing they're really trying to get at when they talk about maybe, you know, commercial awareness is trying to take you away from the kind of the formalistic way of how law works. You know, what do you need in a contract, consideration, intention, acceptance, to move beyond that and take a look at, okay, so our clients expect us to understand, you know, the legal framework. How does that actually mean in practice? What kind of problems are clients coming to us to fix? So in some ways, not having that kind of formal framework in your head already is actually slightly helpful when you're coming at it from a non-law perspective.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the concrete steps that you take, so this will be slightly different for Blaze and I, because we came to the firm at a time when you still did something called the GDL, which is the conversion course. I think for all of you watching now, you'll do something called the SQE, but it's basically the same thing. So you'll spend a year sort of doing a very, very condensed law degree, doing all of the key modules, and then you'll spend another year doing slightly more practical aspects, which is something that we used to call the LPC, but my understanding is that it's all kind of wrapped up into this one thing called the SQE now. And so that's actually a really great opportunity to kind of start making networks with people already. So I know for Clifford Chance, for example, we all do the SQE together in classes together. So before you come to the firm, you've spent 1 or 2 years already learning with your future colleagues, which is great when you become trainees, because it kind of still feels like you're at university together and you get lunch together and stuff like that. So it is a bit of a long process going from a non-law degree, converting, and then finally becoming a trainee. But what we should probably also add is that Clifford Chance cover your tuition fees and your maintenance if you do end up getting an offer from them before you start doing your SQE. So it's a really good idea to try and apply to firms if you think that you would like to become a lawyer in future before you get to that SQE stage, so that you can A, get your tuition paid for by the firm, and B, get a bit of money to live on during that time as well, which was really great.
Yeah, so speaking to that, obviously that's a really great suggestion, and perhaps something that people might not have considered. Are there other things that you wish that you'd known, or kind of like timelines that would have been beneficial for you to know as you were considering switching into a legal career? Maybe things that people who were studying law would already know and you didn't have maybe that access to.
I'm not sure this is something that other lawyers or law students would have had, but I think I had a lot of friends who were quite anxious about whether they think law was right for them, and they weren't quite sure, and they wanted to try and figure things out before trying. And to my mind, that's the wrong way around, right? The open day is a chance for you to go and sit there, not just for the firm to kind of be like, oh, do we like this person? Maybe they might be a vacation scheme, or to kind of build those relationships. But it's also the other way around. It's you just sit there and think, is this right for you? I think, when I was doing either first-year schemes in other fields, for example, and they weren't for me. And I'm glad that I did them. So in the sense of, maybe not specifically timelines, but I wouldn't hold around waiting for a moment where you think, oh yeah, this is right for me. Go and have a shop, try an open day somewhere, try a vacation scheme somewhere, try a first-year scheme somewhere, and then use that to figure out whether it's right for you.
Yeah, I think, and in terms of the concrete timelines, I understand that a lot of people watching this talk are maybe this time has already passed, but during first year, there's something called the milk round, where a lot of I think it's sort of October to December, a lot of the firms open applications for their first year schemes. But in second year is like the really big recruiting round for a lot of firms. So it's in that first term of second year that is a really crucial time to be thinking about applying to a lot of law firms. Peculiarly, Clifford Chance doesn't actually have a scheme for second years. It mainly recruits from either first years, or once you've actually got your degree, you can interview directly for a training contract. So you don't go and get work experience on a vacation scheme, you just interview for that. But for other firms, and lots of them are similar to Clifford Chance, second year will be a really key time. Another thing to look out for is, like Blaise already mentioned, is the open days. So those are just one-day events hosted at the law firms, but they can be quite good sort of tasters of law, and also can give you quite good experiences of the differences between different law firms. So, it would be possible to do a couple of open days at some different firms, and then a back scheme at another one. But it's by no means necessary to kind of get all this work experience at lots of different firms. I only ever did work experience at Clifford Chance, and that didn't hold me back or anything. But if you were feeling like you really wanted to be sure about which firm you wanted to choose, a bit like college open days, you could go along to a few of them.
Yeah, so I mean, for me personally, I know a lot about the colleges, but I know very little about the types of firms that exist. And when I'm trying to help someone decide about colleges, I'll ask them some things, what do you like? What are you looking for? And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about different firms that exist. So maybe what type of firm is Clifford Chance, a bit about that, as well as what other kinds of firms exist, and how you might know what to look for when you're considering what firms to look at and to consider.
Sure. I mean, I have to go with this, that's all right. I suppose in one sense, the kind of starting point is kind of general city law, is the kind of first thing that you'd be looking at. The vast majority of commercial training contracts in the UK are London-based. There are some in Bristol as well, but the vast majority are London-based. And then you've got various kinds of terms that you use for different types of firms. You've got the Magic Circle, which is your Clifford Chance, alumni, Freshfields, Slaughter and Bay, and what's the fifth one that I've forgotten?
Linklaters.
Linklaters. It's a vacation team there. I should remember that. And then you've got your Silver Circle firms. You've got your US firms who come in and tend to be quite specialized. And then you've got other kinds of city firms of various sizes, and then you've got maybe more boutique firms, which tend to be like maybe have one or two offices, focus on very niche areas. I think in some ways, when you get into practice, you start to realize the difference between the firms is not that big. There's a lot of similarities between them. I tend to find when I was at university, the kind of differences between them could be overstated. Of course, Clifford Chance is the best. But I wouldn't overstate the differences between them, which sometimes can happen with students kind of trying to rank where they are versus each other. Once you get into practice, there are a lot of similarities. Will different firms have different specialities? Absolutely. But in terms of, I tend to think that maybe what's more important is kind of considering the kind of size of the firm, right? Do you want a firm with one or two offices, or do you want a medium-sized firm, or do you want a really big kind of firm? And then that kind of affects the kind of work that you do entail.
Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Izzy, in terms of types of firms or types of law even.
Yeah, I think Blaise summarized it quite well. I think what you could definitely, considering this is for a bunch of Cambridge students, I guess most of us are quite high achievers or overachievers. I would say that, most Cambridge students are probably applying to the Magic Circle and American law firms because they're considered as, more elite, more prestigious. And I think there is definitely a conception that, particularly with the Magic Circle firms, you perhaps get kind of this better training, maybe all-rounded training contract. So there's definitely like slight differences. I would say that also it will be something you get asked in training contract interviews. So why did you choose this firm? And so key metrics to think about are, like Blaise said, thinking about the size of the firm. So is it a truly global law firm that does, multi-jurisdictional work? Is there the opportunity to get a secondment abroad, which is what a lot of trainees and associates get to do at Clifford Chance? Because I think we have something like 32 offices, some in the 30s somehow. So I've got lots of friends going to Sydney, Hong Kong, New York, Paris from March, which is very exciting. And I mean, for me personally, the reason I chose Clifford Chance was because I felt like a Magic Circle firm was, that truly global firm that did really, really good quality work. I liked that it was headquartered in London, so there was an English law focus to it. I thought I'd get really good training. And then I think something that you can use to differentiate the firms is potentially their values. So if you look more at kind of the sorts of pro bono work they have, what are their diversity targets? How do they choose to present themselves? I think that's something that's always quite good to say in an interview, is to look at how the thing that you're talking about chooses to present itself and try and speak to what they obviously want to try and do. So I know Clifford Chance is very keen on ESG and its diversity targets. If you're also showing an interest in that, then that's probably shows you'd be a good fit. But yeah, I think Blaise mainly covered it all.
Absolutely. I think you started talking a bit about, questions that might be asked. So I think it would be beneficial to talk a little bit more about actually applying and the sort of thoughts that you might be able to offer people who are considering applying, especially on being able to sell what you did at university and kind of the benefits that that's given you going into the law.
Sure. Yeah, I can take this one first. I think firstly, what I would just say is, I was trying to think just before this panel, do I think that I've ever been disadvantaged having a non-law degree? And I would say that I never have. I mean, around the firm, trainees get asked to do different things. And I think once there was an email that went around saying, did anyone study conflicts of laws at university, which is obviously for a law student. But I can count multiple occasions where someone has said, does anyone have a science degree? Does anyone have any knowledge of this random thing that the client needs to know about? So actually, my science degree has made me stand out more than my lawyer friends. But in terms of questions at interview, maybe it's helpful for me to run through the kind of mechanics of the interview process, and then Blaise to talk a bit more about kind of his thoughts on non-law. But so at the moment, to apply for Clifford Chance, there's a few different hoops to go through, which can be slightly daunting. So the first step is something called the Watson-Glaser test, which is kind of like a critical thinking test. It was basically like a comprehension. It's sort of judging how you interpret chunks of text and what key messages you would pull out of them. So, which is something that you kind of do every day as a lawyer. So it's a pretty good test to do. And that is kind of like an automatic process. So they cut off people's scores, and depending on what score you got, you get through to the next round. And then you get asked to write a written application. So you submit a CV, but you also write about kind of why you should be picked, why you've chosen the firm, and why you want to go into law. And here the key thing to talk about is work experience and positions of responsibility. So I remember I talked about a few different committees I was on, things that I'd done at school, because you might not have had that much experience yet at university, but really try and pull out of those the key lessons you've learned and show kind of like development and kind of ambition within that, I think is really important. And then a few bits about, why you think you would like to go into law. So what aspects of the job appeal to you, and why you chosen the firm. And that gets read by the graduate development or graduate recruitment people at Clifford Chance. After that, I think there's now also a video interview, which you are asked to record. And then there are the assessment days. So the assessment days involve two aspects. One of them is something called a case study. So you get sort of, the lights are going off in my office. You get a kind of fake task through from a partner, and you might get asked to kind of come up with some bullet points for discussion. And it will be quite a general task, so you definitely won't be disadvantaged as a non-law student. I remember mine was something like it was a really general question about some contract or something, and I ended up bringing up points just about things that I knew from current affairs. So I think I spoke about political risk with China at the time, and we were just about to have Brexit, so I brought that up as well. So it doesn't really require you to have legal knowledge, it just requires you to have a bit of common sense and kind of commercial awareness, so current affairs knowledge and things like that. So that's the case study. The second aspect of the assessment day is an actual competency-based interview. So that will be an interview where they ask you things like, give us an example of a time you worked in a team, give us an example, what's your biggest weakness, and things like that. And that they ask you questions. And then after that, you either will be given the vacation scheme that you applied for, or if you were applying directly for the training contract, you would get given the training contract. If you were applying for the vacation scheme, there might then be another interview at the end to kind of talk about how the vacation scheme worked, and then you would get given the offer. The vacation scheme at Clifford Chance is called Spark, and it's just for first years. So that's kind of like the mechanics. I don't know, Blaise, if you then want to talk about the whole questions and non-law thing.
Oh, yeah. I suppose, to my mind, the big thing is to cover the basics, right? There's three main basics. Why commercial law, and why you. The first two require a bit of investigation into. The first question, like why law, is actually an extremely difficult question, and it's one that people would quite like to think about. I often try and think about it in terms of, answer maybe apply to the bar, or maybe could it apply to banking as well? If so, think about refining it. You know, for me, I always thought it was like a nice mixture of the academic and practical. The kind of that, you know, a lot of the work I do is, you know, quite academic, but at the same time, you have to go and take very practical steps to go and get a pleading over the line. Also about Clifford Chance, once again, depth of research works really well here. Trainee, I mean, without the chance to throw my trainees under the bus, send them a message on LinkedIn. You know, they don't bite. And it's often a good way to go and ask people, you know, what kind of deals or what kind of matters do you think I should be looking at? What kind of things about Clifford Chance are different? You know, for me, the big thing that I really liked was the people, which is a very difficult thing to try and put down on a document. But I think I got a slight laugh when I mentioned that I really like the idea that the insolvency team has their ski trip called the Insolvent Ski, and kind of made the point, you know, Clifford Chance is a place that does very serious work and is pretty proud of that, but they don't take themselves too seriously. And I think that resonated quite well. So, you know, try and find out about a deal. It's, you know, well, you can kind of go and say, oh, Clifford Chance maybe a tier 1 firm or tier 2 firm and whatever. But if you're able to kind of look and try and figure out where the value add from a law firm is, where there's been like something has got stuck in the mud, whereas the law firm managed to outside, and then why you? You know, it had to be legal stuff. I just think showing ambition. I did a lot of society stuff. I was the president of my JCR, and I tend to find that expect you to kind of be a incredible router or president of Law Society or whatever. But congratulations if you are. But it's about showing that you're willing to go and do something extra with your time, that you're willing to go and take on responsibilities that you didn't have to go and take on at university, and using that to go and show that you're a pretty driven individual. Let me get into the case study. I think into my first interview and kind of being told, I think it might still be CD blind, and where. And I remember the interview going saying, I was kind of struggling with the question. He said, well, tell me what you did in your law degree. And I said, I didn't do a law degree. And so they started taking me through the ropes a bit more slowly. I think an important thing to remember in law firms is service. Like Clifford Chance, we full service, so we try and cover as many bases as possible. But a law firm is kind of structured around a deal. If we're kind of going from top to bottom, you know, you've got your now we call it CP&A, arranged for the purchase of one company by another. GSM is kind of geared around financing companies, be it that purchasing a company or not. Your antitrust team who kind of help with the regulatory issues around it. You'll have your tax, pensions, employment team who deal with the kind of very nitty-gritty, very technical aspects of the deal that have to be dealt with. Real estate is another quite nitty-gritty technical area. And then litigation is kind of an outlier in some ways, but can advise on kind of risk appetite purchases. If you're kind of wondering about kind of what a law firm does, through the lens of the deal, what department will get involved, that's probably the strongest way and the most kind of common sense way to go through it.
I think that makes sense. Oh, go.
Sorry, no, something that's just popped into my head that I thought I would add is just thinking back to my own particular interview, which was at the end of the vacation scheme. It was actually, so it was with two partners, one of whom was this really cool lady who was the head of people, and we had a great chat about kind of women in the law. And then the other partner had done a natural sciences degree, and we had a great chat about why we had both decided to not, well, why I was thinking about and why he had decided not to continue with science, and talking about our real interest in the subject still. And we just kind of had a bit of a chat really about why we found it interesting. So I thought that actually kind of played into my favor quite a lot, that I was able to relate to him on more of a personal level and have that conversation at interview. So that was good from a non-law perspective. And I remember in my first seat team, so the first department that I sat in within the firm, there was a partner there who was really proud of the fact that he'd done a history degree. And he would always talk about how in every interview, if he had a history student, he loved chatting to them about how they'd done a history degree, and he thought it was the best degree to be a lawyer. So there is definitely no prejudice against non-law students, and in fact, it's a way to connect to people on another level, which can be really helpful. And just one more point, sorry, on the work experience that you put down in your application. I don't know if you remember, Blaze, but our previous head of graduate talent, Laura Yates, she always used to like telling this story of the best application she ever saw was from this girl who her main thing she talked about in her application was working as a Christmas elf at a grotto at Christmas, and she'd done it like every year. And she talked about how, all the work she's had to put in, the levels of responsibility, and how she had to, be really positive and that kind of thing. And Laura always used to say, it sounds a bit silly, but it was actually the best one she'd ever seen because it just worked really well, which I think proves the point that you don't need to be in Law Society president. You don't have to have done really anything like that. You just need to kind of be able to demonstrate kind of the core skills that you would need here, which are transferable skills like project management and teamwork and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. Oh, go ahead, Blaze. Sorry.
No, I want to tell a very quick story of I remember in my interview, I was interviewed by a partner, and I think he was a pilot previously, and so he had a much better tell me about a time when you were under pressure answer than me, which involved when one of his engines blew up midway through a flight and he had to go and land the plane. We take all sorts here. So, as Izzy mentioned, it doesn't have to go and be about both.
It sounds like you can come into the law from a number of different angles, be it scientist or historian or pilot or Christmas elf. So I wonder what you two think. And obviously, I'm sure that if you asked any lawyer, they might have a different answer. But what you think some skills that everybody who does law might want to think about having, or that would really be beneficial for anybody who wanted to go into the law.
I think speaking from a trainee perspective, which is a slightly different job to what a fully fledged lawyer like Blaze does, but I think the most useful skill that I have found as a trainee is just being, really organized and being able to project manage. Because whether that was, I've sat in different teams. I'm in the litigation team at the moment, but I've done transactional team and I did also an advisory team. And in all three, the most important thing was being able to keep on track of all the different work streams within a deal or a project or a case. And, being able to follow up with people, being able to keep to the deadlines, knowing when things were flexible, knowing that if the client rings me up, which often happens as a trainee, I was able to answer straight away about, what was happening, or able to say, actually, this is something you need to speak to my senior about. So I think I would say organization and project management has definitely been the most important thing. And then thinking about, when I think about feedback that I've got, like people are always the most impressed if they think that you're something, if you're reliable and you're a safe pair of hands that can actually be trusted to just deal with stuff and know what's going on. So yeah, organization and project management.
Yeah, I think the same still applies as you get more and more senior. I see it as an associate now when I work with trainees, right? I often think a safe pair of hands is the highest compliment that people you can really have in any appraisal. Because that's, in one sense, you are in a very time pressure job. There are a lot of things going on. And I think I would also add that these are things that you learn over time. So I think if we kind of took a step back and kind of went and said, okay, so we've got organization, but what do we need kind of underneath that? It's a certain amount of ambition that you want to go and do a good job. And I think a certain amount of, stress, resilience. Lots of things can fly in. It's about understanding, being able to organize yourself. And these are things you develop. They're not things that are expected. They're things that you learn over time, over your seats. I'm still learning every day. Those kind of
think I missed the last bit. I don't know if it was just me, but I think I just missed the last bit of what you said, Blaze.
I was just kind of saying, I think I'm learning forms of resilience, and the kind of skills required, the kind of organization required. You learn that every day. I was just kind of making the point that they were supposed to necessarily come in with, but if you kind of going back to kind of extracurriculars, you've got excess capacity, that you're willing to take extra responsibility, which is very much appreciated, at every level.
Absolutely. And I think that both of you are at very different points in your career, perhaps not very different, but different points nonetheless. And I wonder if you could talk to me a little bit about, for you, just that people can have kind of a sense of what it might look like to be in your shoes, what your days look like, day-to-day life and schedule.
Yeah, so I can start with this. So as I said, I'm in my second year of my training contract. So as a trainee, you spend 6 months in lots of different departments, and I'm currently in the litigation team. So I'll preface this with the fact that your day-to-day looks very different depending on what team you're in. But I think my day normally starts around 9:30, kind of checking through emails that have come in overnight, sort of making a quick plan of what's the most urgent thing that I need to do this morning. And then what I will be doing is start time recording. So at law firms, we are beholden to our timers, and we have to record all of our billable time. So you become very good at switching between different timers for all the different tasks that you're doing for clients. So common tasks might be kind of reviewing comments that we've had from the other side or from the client, and sort of thinking about what we might want to say back, putting them into documents. You might be asked to kind of summarize some aspects of case law, so go and research some cases and prepare a kind of note about some different things for people that are more senior in your team or for the client. What else would I be doing? There might be things to do with, so in litigation, we have to do sort of review of documents that we get given by the other side. It's called disclosure. So both parties in the case will disclose documents that they are relying on for their claim or their defense to each other, and you get to look at them. That's kind of similar to in a transaction where if you're selling a company, you have something called due diligence. So the buyer will want to review lots and lots of different stuff about the seller. So all of their property contracts and all of their supplier contracts and things like that. So due diligence or disclosure review can involve trawling through lots of documents and sort of picking out key things to flag. So are there any issues? Are there any good things for us? So that can often be quite a long task. And then I might go to a few calls. So we have a lot of Teams meetings, either with the client or internally. Sometimes there are client meetings in person, which is always fun because you get some really good food. They always give you like a nice lunch. What other sorts of tasks do I do as a trainee? I think that's the main tasks that you would do as a trainee. There are also some quite unglamorous tasks sometimes because you are, well, almost the bottom of the food chain, as it were. We also do have assistants and paralegals that can help with some of the slightly more kind of grunt work of stuff. But you might also sometimes get asked to kind of like label documents and, proofread, check for typos, which is not always that fun. But, it builds up your attention to detail and things, and you just got to kind of accept it. But hopefully you also get a balance of some of the more interesting work that I said at the beginning. So I think that covers most of what a trainee does.
Kind of an associate level litigation it's quite similar in a way. Quite a lot of similar tasks, but at a slightly more intense level. So take, for instance, you might go and have the trainees kind of doing a first level review to kind of filter out what's clearly irrelevant. Have me as an associate go and filter through what is left behind as kind of possibly relevant to go and filter through and say what's relevant and needs to be disclosed. without wishing to sound like a broken record or like every other lawyer, no 2 days are the same. Today I have been in court, and I'll be in court for the next 2.5 weeks. That involves kind of sitting, conversing with counsel, helping out prepare handouts, and just attending for any kind of emergencies or items that might be needed very quickly or any kind of quick analysis. On a slower day, I might be sitting there, for instance, reviewing pleadings that we've drafted, helping to go and draft witness statements. A commercial litigation is a very long process. It can take up to 2 years, 3 years, and in some cases, litigation can go on for almost a decade. And so there's a lot of kind of, say, as a history student, sometimes people don't particularly enjoy document review or disclosure. I did lots of work in the archives, so for me, it's a bit like going back to university and kind of doing it all over again. Different things to different people. I think it is given a very, very good overview, kind of the general kind of streams of work that we have to do.
It seems like there are a lot of opportunities to kind of perhaps not make it your own, because you do have tasks to complete, but there's a lot that goes into it. Perhaps fingers in many pies. I think we may roll into some questions. Of course, anybody in the audience, please feel free to submit questions, and we also have some that were pre-submitted by people when they registered. So there are a few that are quite specific. One person asks, how would a degree in philosophy or English benefit me as a lawyer? And I think to that, it might be helpful to speak to kind of some of the skills that you can gain from perhaps an essay-based degree.
I don't know how many essays you did doing HPS.
I actually did do 3 essays a week, but I guess they're not like history essays, so I'll pipe down.
Okay, so maybe we'll take it from a slightly different angle of an art subject. One thing that's really useful is it does teach you a lot about being able to analyze people's arguments, being able to understand the weaknesses of your own argument and the weaknesses of others' arguments. To go and deploy evidence, go and say, X person gives and says this, it's based on this information, and here's why. I also think that a lot of transferable skills are more kind of, so it's not like you have skill A, skill B, skill C. In some ways, the kind of pressure that you go to have at Cambridge or at any university, really, to kind of produce a piece of work each week kind of puts you in good stead for the kind of pressures that you do face of careers. Similarly, just the kind of ability to kind of sit there, be willing to, right? We're lawyers, we do an immense amount of reading. I went into comment to a client, and it's very interesting seeing a difference between a kind of a lawyer style email where we go and set out everything very clearly, and here's point A, here's point B, here's point C, and then kind of an internal email where somebody goes and writes 2 lines to another person. I would kind of put the core of it at the ability to kind of make arguments, to be able to go and deploy evidence, and the comfort to be able to write. As you go and get more senior, that becomes more and more concise, or more and more comfortable with your own voice. And I think that's a pretty useful skill to go and have as a lawyer.
I will say that I did do English as my undergraduate degree, so I completely agree with everything that you've said, Blaise. And we had a session yesterday where I believe that one of the panelists said, it's incredible how many people can't write. And I will say that I think both law and any of the humanities subjects do give you a really good background in actually being able to kind of construct logical arguments, which would be really beneficial. Another question, perhaps from a different angle, is are there any sorts of degrees that you think wouldn't transfer into being a lawyer?
I don't think so, really. I think, the key thing that Clifford Chance definitely is looking for is just kind of academic ability and then the more soft skills, so organization, etc. I really don't think that it does discriminate as long as you have you achieve a good degree, you have a good academic history, and then perform well at interview. I don't think it matters. Just thinking about people who are current trainees with me, we have definitely got a music student, which is maybe one of those more unusual degrees. I'm trying to think of kind of more unusual subjects at Cambridge. I guess that's, I don't know.
I know a couple of asnats.
Okay.
I am always in fear of musos. Their degree is incredibly intense, and I think way more intense than my legal career could ever be. A friend of mine who studied English. My dissertation was on the 17th century derivatives. It's a bit strange. Now, as I mentioned, we've got a former pilot, we've got a former Royal Marines commando. We've got a guy who's a former children's entertainer. He's in drama. Once again, I really don't think there's I don't even think that necessarily doing a law degree marks you out as a right to be a solicitor or a barrister. I think there's a very big difference between what you study at university and what it is in practice. I wouldn't say there's like any degree that I've done like. There's nothing like that.
I think that's really good to hear. And I do wonder, this isn't a question that was submitted, this is actually a question for me. I wonder what the biggest differences that you can find, perhaps between, you may not know the answer, but between the people that you've met who did study law and the things that might have surprised them as they actually went into practice, where actually practicing law and the career really differentiated itself from the study.
I think actually thinking on it, I don't think I could differentiate my law and non-law friends, other than the fact that I know what degrees they studied. But I really don't think I could draw a distinction. What I would say is actually, I personally, maybe I'm just being very pro Cambridge here, but I felt like I could definitely tell on the equivalent to the SQE who had been at Cambridge and who hadn't, because it is quite an intense course and you will need to do a lot of work for it, which I didn't really find to be very different to my degree. I had Saturday lectures every year of my degree because of NatSci, and was used to a very high workload, whereas I do think that a few of my friends maybe did struggle to adjust. So, that would be the only differentiating factor I can think of. I don't think I've noticed a difference between law and non-law students.
The only difference I would see is maybe sometimes being a little bit more au fait with how practitioners' guides work, knowing where to find an answer. But I would say it's a 20-30 minute difference. It's a 20-30 minute difference of, okay, what is the standard contracts, text for poets, title? Okay, now I know that as somebody who I genuinely see that as the main difference. I don't see much. I have friends of mine who are non-law. I have friends of mine who are law. It fades very, very quickly.
Again, that's really good to hear. Changing the topic only a lot. What are your working hours like?
Well, I think corporate law is notoriously not a 9 to 5 career. It does differ slightly between the different teams that you're in. In a transactional team, you are much more likely to kind of have very kind of peaks and troughs. So you could have some really not very great hours, followed by then some really good hours for a week whilst you're kind of recuperating in between deals. If I'm being completely honest, so my average start time is always 9:30. I don't ever really, if someone scheduled in a 9 a.m. call for me, that would be I would be horrified. But in terms of finish time, I would say a good on a great day, I would finish at 5, but that is quite rare. Maybe my average finish time is somewhere around, in litigation, about 9 p.m. In my first seat, more like maybe 10 p.m. In my second seat, it was mainly 6 p.m. every day because it was an advisory seat. So it really does differ. And I think that is definitely something to be aware of, is that, corporate law is a demanding job in terms of hours, and it's not really something you can escape from. At the same time, it's really fun and you get remunerated well for it. So, it is a factor, but that's just it, unfortunately.
I mean, from an associate level, as I said, as Izzy mentioned, it really does depend on the department you're in. I think transactional advisory litigious is quite a good way to kind of differentiate between the different kind of workloads, right? Transactional can be very, very busy one week, and then you're doing nothing for 2 weeks, and that's just the way that they work. Whereas litigious teams are kind of much more the other way. There's just a constant stream of work. Ours are a lot more standard. If you can kind of fit in somewhere between the two. I tend to try and be an early arriver. I tend to arrive around 8:30. And then, when do I finish? I'd say around 7 or 8. Like, I'm in litigation, like the litigation across the market is white hot right now. There's a trainee finishing at 5. That's just the nature of the work. Sometimes there's plenty of work, as there is right now in the market, and sometimes there's a lot. So you take it as it comes.
Would you say that weekend work is common?
I think here is somewhere where you can really differentiate between what we call the magic circle firms and the American firms. There's definitely an attitude at Clifford Chance that weekend work is like an exceptional thing. I have worked a few weekends, but like it was with like big apologies from the partners and people saying really sorry that you have to do this, but like it just has to be done. And there was one weekend where I really should have been working, but I had a family birthday and I just said I actually can't come, and the team were obviously fine with that. So I have worked a few weekends, but there's definitely an exceptional attitude to it, whereas I know that my friends at US law firms, it's definitely not an exceptional thing for you to work at weekends.
I often go and say, so I did 3 seats at Clifford Chance, and I went to the secondment. I did more weekend work on the secondment than I did the Clifford Chance. It was a bit uncertain. It was a client secondment, so unexpected. Sometimes it happens, leading up to a big deadline or the like. But yeah, I'd agree in the sense of it's generally more exceptional than the rule. I've just been on holiday last week. There was a very clear line. People didn't contact me, and if they got an email like, "Oh, now I'm said, sorry, Blaze, I'll deal with this. Don't worry." I generally, does weekend work happen? Yes. But slightly, yeah. But more realistic note, friends who kind of work elsewhere, I don't think that their working times are that much better. Evenings are much freer by the virtue of finishing earlier. Dare I say, at work can be a bit tiring, even the basic 9 to 5.
I would also say that I had Oh, sorry. No, you go, please. I just also had a secondment to a charity actually, which was very much 9 to 5. But I found that actually I was still kind of quite tired from the day, and I didn't really use the evening. So I maybe we are completely blinded to real life Blaze, but I don't think that your evenings are necessarily as you don't get up to much in the evenings anyway. So I don't see that it's such a big issue.
Adulthood.
Yeah.
Pivoting again back to some more specific questions. one attendee wants to know, would modern languages be useful to a lawyer?
I know several associates in my team and senior associates and partners who did modern languages. There's obviously the benefit of being able to go and visit clients. I'm on a matter where I'm dealing with foreign language documents. So, I don't have that many. My foreign language skills aren't great. I can speak some French, which helped when I was on secondment. But I have plenty of colleagues who it both helps in the sense of being able to do foreign work or being able to understand foreign work, but it also just helps in the general sense of the academic side of it is very helpful too. The fact they're rather just a kind of a utilitarian, congratulations, you can speak French, please meet our French clients.
Absolutely. I think we have time for about 1 or 2 more questions. So this commenter wants to know, is it necessary to familiarize yourself with law terminology and frameworks? And is it worthwhile to read a textbook or join a law society? So I assume that that's from somebody who's not quite decided on law, or maybe is studying something else and considering making that pivot.
On legal frameworks, no need to read a textbook at all. IT is quite a good thing to read, as cliched as it is. Another good thing to maybe read is Matt Levine's column for Bloomberg. I can't remember exactly what the name of it is. I'll try and find it now. Matt Levine's column for Bloomberg is a very good read. I think kind of takes corporate matters in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way, which I think is money stuff. That's a very good kind of intro way of getting you interested in how markets work, the kind of disputes that come up, the kind of problems that come up that you'd get a lawyer to go and fix. Matt was formerly a lawyer at a top US firm, who then became a banker and then became a journalist. I think that's a really good thing to go and read. And the third thing, the Law Society. I think joining a Law Society is probably a good idea. And so if it's anything like when I was at uni, the Law Society, both at a college level and will tend to have lots of just kind of drinks and dinners with various law firms. To go and meet them, to go and kind of get the gist of what they're like. Because I generally think people is the most important thing. You get other people there. Very key thing to try and work out. And I think, politely, law firms do kind of throw money at these dinners and drinks. The free food always works.
Free food always works, which I have absolutely learned in my role organizing events. I think just to wrap up, one final question is what sorts of resources? Obviously, that column Blaze was really useful, and I think that that's a great place to start as well. Are there any other resources or columns, podcasts, anything at all that you would recommend to people who are considering switching into the law?
I think one thing that our graduate recruitment team would definitely want us to flag is Clifford Chance has these things called the Global Virtual Internships, which are designed for anyone, which look really good. I did actually do one before I came to the firm, I think, about sustainability. I'm not sure exactly which ones they have now. I think there is actually also one directed at school students, sixth formers, which is a bit more about kind of what is the law. And then there are more kind of advanced ones to do. But lots of other law firms do kind of similar things. So it might be worth trying a few. So that's a good resource. I think Blaze also mentioned the FT, but maybe I was slightly cut off, which stands for the Financial Times, which you definitely do have a subscription to through, or at least you did at the time I was at Cambridge. But the Financial Times is a really good resource. What you can do is you can flag particular sectors that you're interested in. And even if you just read the front page, it will come up with, some big deals, some big geopolitical issues. and try and build that commercial awareness, which to my mind is just kind of common sense and current affairs, but seems to have this magical aura to it. So that would be my two main tips.
Just quickly running through them. FT Alphaville is kind of their slightly more tongue-in-cheek side of the FT, and it's quite a good entry point if you want to kind of read the FT, but you find the kind of the general be a bit complicated. Stuff. I mean, there is the Clifford Chance podcast, and some interesting stuff. You know, it's kind of more targeted at clients. It's a good way to read. Clifford Chance will also issue client briefings. Have a read of them yourself. I think they're a very good way of kind of understanding an issue, understanding what kind of issues our clients have, and are a good starting point. The kind of industry things to read, I mean, has some kind of comparing firms, kind of good entry points. Chamber Student is also very good. Roll on Friday is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but also their firm's most list is pretty good. The Lawyer also has The Lawyer is kind of a press magazine for lawyers, but they've got the Lawyer to Be, which is very much targeted at students, and I think is a good read. Career Service. I think David Ainscough is still there.
He is, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, David is lovely, and so anybody who is at Cambridge and is considering making that switch, definitely speak to David, and I think he'd be more than happy to speak to you. I think that brings us a little bit over time, but thank you so much. If you have any closing remarks, please feel free.
I guess what I would, with fear of being bombarded with LinkedIn requests, but I am happy if anybody would like to chat more or has any specific questions, they can find me on LinkedIn at my name. So feel free to do that, because I know sometimes it can be useful to chat to people about specific random questions.
Feel free to add me. I suppose the main thing I'd just say is just apply. I'm gonna a bit, you know, I've had friends like go in their head, so like, oh, I'll apply next year when I feel a bit better or whatever. Go ahead, like, you know, there's no harm in applying, having a crack, seeing what it's like. You know, maybe go on to open day, maybe go onto a vacation scheme, and then figure it out from there. You know, say you're young, because I'm still young, but you're younger than me, and you've got plenty of time to go and make choices and opportunities and try things out. But you know, as you get closer and closer to looking into your degree, the number of opportunities, but the amount of time you have slightly dwindles. The earlier, the better.
Thank you both so much. I think that's incredibly useful. For anybody in the chat, anybody who's watching, if you have any further questions, please feel free to email me. It's outreach@law.cam.ac.uk. And thank you, Izzy and Blaise. This has been genuinely so informative, and it's perhaps made me want to make that pivot into law. I'll let you know how well that goes. Thank you guys so much, and have a lovely evening.